Proxy's back.
Proxyopoly!
Back again.
Proxyopoly!
Proxy's back.
Proxyopoly!
Tell a friend.
Proxyopoly!
Proxy's back. Proxy's back. Proxy's back. Proxyopoly. And welcome back, all you bulls and bears and betas out there, to the buzz of this Proxyopoly TM spin-off series we call the Proxyopoly TM Podcast. I am your host, the Proxyopolist, formerly known as the Jackal of Trades. Here again with another exclusive proprietary Proxyopoly TM research report for the artificial intelligence company privately listed, not publicly traded, responsible for all or a majority of the demand for data centers popping up all over this country, and as well as the architect for one of the initial artificial intelligence large language models we know called ChatGPT, OpenAI. That's right, Proxyopolists. Following the Proxyopoly TM scores for Deutsche Bank, BlackRock, Tesla, Walmart, ExxonMobil, Meta Platforms, Amazon, Spotify, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, NVIDIA, DWS Group, General Motors, Lockheed Martin, Waffle House, and SpaceX. We now have on the docket today a scathing analysis of OpenAI prior to its IPO, which it has filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That being said, the date of this podcast is being released July 31st, but today I'm recording this on July 24th, and we're going to see how this all plays out. Without further delay. Introduction. OpenAI is an artificial intelligence research, deployment, infrastructure, consumer technology, enterprise, software, public policy, and increasingly industrial development organization whose stated mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all humanity. It is also a corporate structure in which ordinary equity ownership and ultimate governance control have been deliberately separated. That distinction is the foundation, keyword, of this report. OpenAI began in 2015 as a non-profit. It established a for-profit subsidiary in 2019 to raise the capital required for advanced AI research and deployment. In October 2025, OpenAI completed a major recapitalization, under which the nonprofit became the OpenAI Foundation. Circle back. And the commercial entity became OpenAI Group PBC, a Delaware public benefit corporation. The foundation owns conventional equity in OpenAI Group PBC, but more importantly retains control through special voting and governance rights that belong solely to the foundation. OpenAI's official description states that the foundation appoints every member of the OpenAI Group board and can replace those directors at any time. The foundation held 26% of OpenAI Group at the completion of the recapitalization. Microsoft held roughly 27%, and current and former employees and other investors collectively held the remaining 47%. Economic ownership is therefore distributed. Ultimate governance authority is not. This arrangement is not automatically irrational. OpenAI develops systems that may materially affect labor markets, cybersecurity, biological research, education, media, military planning, political communications, software production, financial services, health care, and the distribution of knowledge itself. Placing control in a mission-oriented non-profit can be defended as an attempt to prevent ordinary investors, the people at home, the proxyopolists at home, from forcing reckless deployment merely because the quarterly revenue graph looks lonely. It can also be described less ceremonially as a governance structure in which outside investors provide enormous amounts of capital, while a self-governing non-profit board retains the decisive ballot. Both of these descriptions are true. The Proxyopoly TM ratings framework discussed in this podcast series is designed for precisely this kind of contradiction. The framework is analogous to financial beta, but instead of measuring the sensitivity of a security's returns to market movements, it measures the volatility impact of a single proxy vote, or its private company equivalent, on public and market governance dynamics. A score of 0.00 represents a market average governance equilibrium. Negative ratings generally indicate greater shareholder contestability, stronger rights, lower management insulation, and realistic possibility that outside voters can alter outcomes. Positive ratings, however, indicate concentrated authority, fortified governance arrangements, executive insulation, hostile or dismissive treatment of outside accountability, and regulatory practices capable of producing governance shocks. OpenAI has no publicly traded ticker yet. No conventional annual proxy statement yet for the public. No public say-on-pay resolutions yet. No exchange-mandated director elections yet. And no ordinary public shareholder franchise yet. Again, the IPO is coming, folks. Are you ready for the OpenAI IPO? Proxyopoly TM is ready, so buckle up. There is consequently no 2026 OpenAI annual general meeting for the public to vote, at which a retail investor can log in, vote against Sam Altman, approve the auditors, and feel momentarily responsible for artificial general intelligence. The absence of a public ballot right now does not make the Proxyopoly TM analysis irrelevant. It makes this inquiry prior to its initial public offering more revealing prior to its public listing. OpenAI has become systemically important before becoming publicly accountable. Well, how is that? Its commercial scale is substantial. OpenAI has raised extraordinary amounts of private capital, built major partnerships with Microsoft, Amazon, SoftBank, Oracle, CoreWeave, and other infrastructure providers, pursued acquisitions across software, deployment, developer tooling, media, and consumer hardware, and undertaken the Stargate Infrastructure Initiative. OpenAI reported in April 2026 that its planned U.S. infrastructure footprint had exceeded its original 10 gigawatt target. while individual arrangements include a 1.2 gigawatt data center lease. A single gigawatt is not a metaphor. It is a power station scale. The environmental and governance implications are therefore no longer confined to whether a language model occasionally invents a legal citation. OpenAI's development strategy now implicates land use, electricity generation, transmission capacity, water consumption, semiconductor supply chains, municipal incentives, local ratepayers, construction, labor, grid reliability, and national industrial policy. The company is not merely training models. It is helping to determine what physical infrastructure the next technological economy will require and who will pay for it. OpenAI is also active in public policy. It publishes U.S., European, and frontier safety policy blueprints, maintains a direct lobbying and advocacy program, employs internal and external lobbyists, and has promoted frameworks addressing infrastructure, national security, frontier model regulation, education, workforce development, government adoption, and AI competitiveness. That is understandable for a company operating at the center of an emerging regulatory regime. It also means OpenAI is not merely being regulated. It is attempting to help design the regulations. The governance stakes are heightened by OpenAI's recent history. In November 2023, the prior nonprofit board removed Sam Altman as CEO, stating that he had not been consistently candid in communications with the board. Employees and investors revolted. Microsoft offered positions to Altman and other OpenAI personnel. Within days, Altman returned as CEO. The board was substantially reconstructed, and the organization later commissioned an outside legal review. In March 2024, a special committee said the review supported continued leadership by Altman and Greg Brockman and expressed full confidence in them. That episode demonstrated that OpenAI's board possessed formal authority to dismiss the CEO, but lacked the practical institutional strength to sustain the decision once employees, investors, commercial partners, and the company's operating dependency on Altman converged against it. The lesson was not that the board had no power. The lesson was that the board had power until it used it. OpenAI subsequently expanded its board, established a safety and security committee, updated its preparedness framework, and published a frontier governance framework designed to connect internal safety practices with emerging legal requirements. Those are meaningful reforms. Yet, the underlying governance question persists. Who can compel OpenAI to follow its own frameworks when commercial urgency, geopolitical competition, infrastructure commitments, or executive preferences point in another direction? The Foundation Board can. The public cannot elect the Foundation Board, however. OpenAI Group investors cannot accumulate enough ordinary stock to take control, because control is held through special foundation rights rather than proportional equity. Customers cannot vote. Affected communities cannot vote. Workers cannot vote as a distinct constituency. Governments can investigate, regulate, condition permits, bring enforcement actions, and threaten procurement consequences, but those are external restraints rather than internal democratic controls. OpenAI's structure therefore creates a remarkable inversion. The organization says that concentrated power creates fragility, and that advanced AI should not distribute power broadly. Its own corporate governance concentrates ultimate power inside a nonprofit board that is not selected by the population, customers, employees, ordinary investors, or the communities hosting its infrastructure, namely the data centers. That does not prove his hypocrisy, per se. However, it does establish irony with unusually good documentation. Right here. This report evaluates OpenAI across the 5 Proxyopoly TM ratings underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly TM score. Those Proxyopoly TM ratings are 1. Proxy accumulation resistance, 2. Bylaw fortification index, 3. Shareholder hostility quotient, 4. Executive entrenchment factor, and 5. Regulatory evasion measure. The analysis accounts for OpenAI's non-profit-controlled public benefit corporation, special governance rights, board structure, 2023 leadership crisis, safety governance reforms, cloud and investor relationships, infrastructure expansion, lobbying, acquisitions, privacy disputes, consumer safety inquiries, copyright exposure, and potential future IPO. The result is a governance profile that is not conventionally management controlled, not conventionally shareholder controlled, and not conventionally public controlled. It is mission controlled, provided the people controlling the mission agree on what the mission means, and subject to their definition of what the mission means. So what does it all mean for OpenAI? Moving on to the Proxyopoly TM ratings. Proxyopoly TM rating number 1, proxy accumulation resistance. OpenAI has been designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 4.70 for the proxy accumulation resistance. By definition, proxy accumulation resistance measures how difficult it is for outside holders to accumulate sufficient voting authority to influence corporate control, board composition, executive succession, strategic policy, or material governance outcomes. A strongly positive rating indicates that outside accumulation is structurally ineffective. A negative rating indicates that investors can realistically build voting power and alter outcomes. In the analysis, OpenAI's proxy accumulation resistance is extreme because ordinary equity accumulation does not provide proportional access to ultimate control. OpenAI Foundation owned 26% of OpenAI Group after the 2025 recapitalization, while Microsoft held approximately 27% and other employees and investors held approximately 47%. At first glance, this appears to create pluralistic ownership structure in which no single equity holder possesses a conventional majority. The first glance is also where conventional corporate governance analysis stops being useful. The OpenAI Foundation possesses special voting and governance rights, through which it appoints every director of OpenAI Group and can replace those directors at any time. Foundation control is therefore not dependent on whether its equity stake remains above 50%, 25%, or any other familiar ownership threshold. Control exists as a separate legal entitlement. An investor could theoretically acquire every available share held by Microsoft employees, former employees, venture investors, strategic investors, and secondary market sellers and still not necessarily acquire the foundation's governing rights. Economic ownership can move. Control remains anchored, however. That structure produces an exceptionally high proxy accumulation resistance because it defeats the basic logic of proxy accumulation. In an ordinary public corporation, an activist can purchase shares, solicit proxies, nominate directors, seek support from institutional investors, and attempt to replace the board. The campaign may fail, but the mechanism exists. At OpenAI, an outside investor cannot simply accumulate the special governance rights held by the foundation. Those rights are not ordinary pieces of stock waiting patiently in a brokerage account. They are embedded in the architecture. Microsoft's approximately 27% stake illustrates the point. Microsoft has been OpenAI's most important historical commercial and infrastructure partner, committed billions of dollars, integrated OpenAI models into major products, provided cloud infrastructure, and participated in agreements that the Federal Trade Commission studied for their potential effects on competition, switching costs, access to compute, and sensitive information. Yet, Microsoft does not control OpenAI Group's board through its equity stake. The foundation does. Key point. The same logic applies to later investors. A February 2026 equity commitment filed as an exhibit by Amazon contemplated Amazon purchasing preferred or common equity in OpenAI Group PBC. OpenAI has announced expanded relationships with Amazon's AWS and an enterprise distribution partnership under which AWS serves as an exclusive third-party cloud distribution provider for a major OpenAI enterprise platform. These partnerships may create commercial influence, infrastructure dependency, and negotiating leverage. They do not create a conventional route to board control. The practical consequences are significant. First, outside investors cannot credibly threaten a proxy contest. They can negotiate contractual protections, information rights, preferred stock provisions, liquidity rights, commercial commitments, and perhaps consent rights over narrowly defined transactions, but they cannot rely on the ordinary democratic mechanism of accumulating common equity and replacing directors. Second, employees who hold stock participate economically but do not receive governance power proportionate to their collective ownership. OpenAI's history demonstrates that employees can exert substantial practical power through threatened departure, public statements, and the value of their technical labor. That is industrial leverage, not proxy democracy. Third, a future IPO would not necessarily normalize proxy accumulation resistance. OpenAI's restructuring was widely understood as creating a capital structure capable of supporting an eventual public offering. And Sam Altman stated in 2025 that an IPO was the most likely long-term path because of OpenAI's capital requirements. Yet, unless the special foundation governance rights are sunsetted, public investors could receive freely tradable stock while remaining structurally unable to determine control. The public might own shares. The foundation would own the election. Fourth, the foundation board itself does not appear subject to a public electoral constituency. Its directors are described as independent, and the board includes backgrounds in technology, public health, cybersecurity, finance, law, nonprofit management, and AI safety. Those qualifications matter, but PAR, proxy accumulation resistance, measures contestability, not resumes. A benevolent, unaccountable board remains unaccountable. It may govern wisely. Outside stakeholders still cannot replace it through ordinary accumulation. There are mitigating factors. OpenAI's foundation control may protect the organization against investors seeking to prioritize short-term commercialization over safety. The PBC form also requires OpenAI Group to advance a stated public benefit and consider broader stakeholder interests rather than shareholder value alone. Very interesting to know. Regulators, attorney generals, courts, commercial partners, employees, customers, and public opinion can exert pressure. The 2025 recapitalization was completed after engagement with California and Delaware attorney generals, demonstrating that external institutions retain meaningful leverage. However, external pressure is not the same as internal voting power. The Proxyopoly TM framework distinguishes between a company that can be disciplined by its owners and one that can only be disciplined when regulators, employees, counterparties, or courts intervene. OpenAI falls into the latter category. Why 4.70 positive as a Proxyopoly TM rating for the proxy accumulation resistance? Well, the rating reflects private company illiquidity and the absence of a public proxy market and special governance rights held exclusively by the foundation and the foundation's power to appoint and remove all OpenAI group directors and the inability of ordinary shareholders to convert economic ownership into ultimate control. OpenAI's proxy accumulation resistance is slightly below the theoretical maximum. Although there is no theoretical maximum, it can go into infinity, but we keep this level to a benchmark of 0. Because regulators, employees, major commercial partners, and the Foundation's legal mission create meaningful external constraints, but from the perspective of one single, ordinary, common proxy vote. OpenAI is a proxy fortress, built from non-profit intentions and Delaware documentation. Moving on to Proxyopoly TM rating number 2. Bylaw Fortification Index, for which OpenAI has been designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 4.10. By definition, the Bylaw Fortification Index measures the degree to which charters, bylaws, share classes, governance agreements, appointment rights, voting thresholds, control mechanisms, or related structural provisions protect incumbent authority and obstruct shareholder-led change. In the analysis, OpenAI receives a strongly positive BFI, Bylaw Fortification Index, because its fortification is not a collection of isolated defensive provisions. It is the structure itself. Traditional corporate fortifications include classified boards, poison pills, supermajority requirements, advance notice bylaws, limits on special meetings, restrictions on written consent, exclusive forum provisions, and dual-class stock. OpenAI's architecture is more unusual. A nonprofit foundation with a minority economic stake holds special governance rights sufficient to control the much larger commercial public benefit corporation. The arrangement separates 3 concepts that public company governance normally attempts to align. 1, economic ownership, 2, fiduciary responsibility, and 3, electoral control. The OpenAI Foundation owns economically meaningful stock and has the same stated mission as OpenAI Group. Very important. But its decision control does not arise merely from that ownership. The Foundation's special rights allow it to determine the group board regardless of proportional stock ownership. This creates a governance lock stronger than an ordinary supermajority threshold. A 75% charter amendment requirement is formidable, but an activist can at least imagine assembling 75% support. A poison pill is formidable, but the board can redeem it. A classified board delays control, but annual elections eventually cycle through the full slate. OpenAI's foundation control is not merely a hurdle to be cleared, it is a different track entirely. The foundation appoints the OpenAI Group Board and may replace its directors at any time. All current foundation directors except Zico Kolter initially serve on the group board. Kolter serves exclusively on the foundation board as a non-voting observer to the board group. And OpenAI also stated that a second foundation director would later transition to foundation-only service and observer status. This arrangement is designed to prevent fragmented governance and maintain mission control. Understandable. It is also means the same directors substantially govern both the controlling nonprofit and the controlled commercial enterprise. Controlling, controlled. Let's differentiate. The foundation is theoretically the monitor. Its directors are also largely the monitored group's directors. That is not complete separation of powers. It is governance consolidation with different letterhead. The PBSC form provides one counterweight. OpenAI group directors are required to consider the public benefit, shareholder interests, and stakeholder interests. That is broader than ordinary shareholder primacy. Yet, PBC duties can also be difficult for outside stakeholders to enforce. The broader the discretion to balance competing interests, the more room directors have to explain almost any decision as an exercise in thoughtful balance. Commercial expansion can be described as necessary to fund the mission. Safety restraint can be described as necessary to protect the mission. Aggressive infrastructure development can be described as necessary to democratize access. Restricting access can be described as necessary for safety. Partnering with large technology companies can be described as necessary for scale. Reducing partnership dependence can be described as necessary for competition. The mission is broad enough to function as both a compass and a legal fog machine. The 2025 recapitalization also converted prior capped profit interests into conventional equity, allowing stockholders to participate proportionally in OpenAI Group's appreciation. The foundation received a warrant tied to a long-term valuation milestone, further aligning its financial resources with OpenAI Group's value. And for those who are not familiar with finance, a warrant, education session, is a promise to receive a security at a predetermined date, but it has no timetable like a right or some other form of equity, but is not a stock. Right you can receive within a certain amount of time, under a couple months. Warrants, however, can last almost a lifetime. Some even have no expiration date. Moving on. The alignment there has benefits. A more valuable OpenAI group can fund the foundation's charitable mission. It also creates a tension. The mission-controlling entity is now a major beneficiary of commercial value appreciation. The watchdog owns a very large interest in the enterprise it is expected to restrain. OpenAI states that independent financial advisors are advised the foundation board and that the recapitalization was unanimously approved. That is proper process. It does not eliminate the structural conflict between maximizing the foundation's resources and restraining the commercial engine that creates those resources. The absence of public disclosure adds to the Bylaw Fortification Index. OpenAI does not currently file a public proxy statement, providing its charter, bylaws, committee charters, director election mechanics, related party transaction policy, executive compensation framework, beneficial ownership table, director attendance, shareholder proposal procedures, or change in control terms in the standardized manner expected from a listed company. OpenAI publishes substantial information voluntarily, including structure summaries, system cards, safety frameworks, policy proposals, research, and company announcements. But voluntary publication is controlled by the publisher. The company decides what is material, what is safe to disclose, and when disclosure serves the mission. A public proxy regime is imperfect, but it does not generally permit the issuer to decide that board election mechanics are too sensitive for shareholders. A future IPO could improve disclosure without reducing fortification. OpenAI could file an S1, as they already have, publish audited financial statements, establish investor relations, conduct earnings calls, and still preserve foundation control. Public company transparency and public company democracy are related but distinct. One can arrive without the other. There are meaningful mitigating features. OpenAI's chairperson and most foundation directors are officially described as independent. The CEO is not the chairperson. The Safety and Security Committee is chaired by an external AI safety academic rather than Sam Altman. The foundation can replace group directors at any time, meaning the board is not legally powerless over management. Nevertheless, the same structure that protects the mission from investors also protects the controlling board from investors. So why assign a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 4.10 on the Bylaw Fortification Index for OpenAI? Well, OpenAI's Bylaw Fortification Index reflects foundation-only special governance rights, consolidated foundation and group boards, limited public access to governing documents, the separation of control from proportional ownership, broad PBC discretion, and the absence of an ordinary shareholder mechanism to amend the controlling structure. The score is lower than PAR, citing the structure contains independent directors, a separate chair, PBC obligations, regulatory oversight, and a dedicated safety committee. The castle does have windows, still very heavily fortified, and shareholders still do not possess the keys to open the drawbridge. Moving on to Proxyopoly TM rating number 3, the shareholder hostility quotient. Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.65 for the shareholder hostility quotient of OpenAI. By definition, the shareholder hostility quotient measures the organization's posture toward investors, employees, users, regulators, affected communities, and other stakeholders seeking information, participation, accountability, or governance reform. A positive score indicates defensiveness, opacity, select engagement, or structural disregard for outside voice. A negative score indicates responsiveness and meaningful stakeholder empowerment. In this analysis, OpenAI's shareholder hostility quotient, or SHQ, is positive but materially lower than OpenAI's PAR and BFI, because the organization has demonstrated real, if uneven, efforts to engage regulators, publish safety information, expand public benefit programs, and respond to criticism. The case for a lower SHQ begins with transparency initiatives. Not actions, but initiatives. OpenAI publishes system cards, safety evaluations, preparedness framework, a frontier governance framework, misuse reports, policy blueprints, governance announcements, and explanations of its structure. Its 2025 preparedness framework identifies tracked frontier risk categories, including biological and chemical capabilities, cybersecurity, and AI self-improvement, along with research categories such as long-range autonomy, autonomous replication, safeguard circumvention, and nuclear or radiological risk. Wow. In 2026, OpenAI published a frontier governance framework mapping its practices to emerging legal requirements, including California frontier AI legislation and the European Union's general-purpose AI framework. OpenAI also transformed the Safety and Security Committee into an independent board oversight committee chaired by Zico Kolter and including Adam D'Angelo, Paul Nakasone, and Nicole Seligman, members of the board. These are not meaningless gestures. They provide more safety disclosure than many private technology companies offer, and in some respects, more than many public companies provide about technically complex operational risks. OpenAI also engaged the California and Delaware Attorney Generals during its recapitalization and altered its early structural proposal so the nonprofit would retain control. This shows that outside criticism and governmental scrutiny affected the final governance design. The foundation has announced major philanthropic commitments and programs involving health, jobs, community support, and AI resilience. OpenAI's structure creates a direct financial link between group value and foundation resources, which could fund public benefit activities at extraordinary scale. Those are shareholder and stakeholder responsive features. The hostile features arise from who is permitted to convert engagement into authority. The hostile features, namely, when we're talking about this, is when OpenAI's investors receive conventional stock but not ultimate control. Employees hold economic interests but no publicly described collective governance rights. Users can provide feedback but not elect the board. Communities hosting large data centers can negotiate locally but do not receive formal representation within OpenAI's central governance. The public can comment on safety frameworks but cannot require adoption of proposed changes. OpenAI listens. OpenAI decides whether listening changes anything. The 2023 leadership crisis also weighed heavily on shareholder hostility quotient. And for those who may not recall, in 2023, executives at OpenAI attempted a coup against CEO Sam Altman in an effort to oust him from leadership. The old board attempted to exercise its authority over the CEO, but initially offered limited public explanation. Employees and investors received insufficient information to evaluate the underlying dispute. The resulting communications vacuum allowed competing narratives to proliferate while the company approached operational fracture. The later outside review examined tens of thousands of documents and numerous interviews, but OpenAI's public summary did not publish the full investigative report. The board expressed confidence in Altman and announced governance reforms, but stakeholders were asked to accept the conclusion without access to the complete evidentiary record. That is not unusual for a private internal investigation. It is also not a model of maximum accountability for an organization developing systems it describes as potentially transformational for humanity. OpenAI's product and regulatory controversies contribute to shareholder hostility quotient. The Italian Data Protection Authority imposed a 15 million euro sanction concerning ChatGPT-related privacy matters in 2024 and ordered an informational campaign. However, the authority later noted that the underlying measure was temporarily removed from its website after a Rome court accepted OpenAI's challenge in March 2026. The procedural posture matters. The sanction should not be described as an uncontested final outcome. The dispute nevertheless demonstrates the scale of privacy and transparency friction surrounding OpenAI's products. The FTC has separately required information from OpenAI in two significant studies. One examined large cloud provider investments and partnerships, including the Microsoft-OpenAI relationship. The other examined consumer-facing AI chatbots acting as companions, with particular concern for children and teenagers, monetization, negative effects, personal information, disclosures, testing, and mitigation practices. Neither FTC study itself is an adjudicated enforcement finding, but both revealed domains in which regulators concluded that voluntary corporate explanations were insufficient and compulsory information gathering was warranted. OpenAI's copyright exposure similarly affects stakeholder relations. Authors, publishers, newspapers, software developers, and other rights holders have questioned whether training and output practices improperly use copyrighted works. OpenAI has licensed or entered licensing agreements with some publishers while litigating against others. The underlying legal questions remain unsettled, but the governance issue is broader than ultimate liability. Who receives a voice when the company's models derive value from an information ecosystem containing protected and unprotected works? The infrastructure build-out creates another SHQ dimension. OpenAI says it is working with local communities and has made commitments that certain project infrastructure costs will not be passed to local ratepayers. It has also emphasized jobs, local development, domestic manufacturing, and grid investment. Those commitments are positive. Yet OpenAI's scale means affected communities may face material consequences involving land, water, transmission, power generation, tax incentives, construction, noise, and local resource allocation. Community engagement cannot be reduced to a groundbreaking ceremony, jobs estimates, and a promise that the electricity bill will remain someone else's problem. Lobbying further complicates the picture. OpenAI publicly describes advocacy and direct lobbying as components of its public policy work, and federal disclosures show internal and external lobbying activity. Companies have a legitimate right to advocate, but a firm that helps write the rules governing frontier AI should disclose its policy objectives, lobbying expenditures, coalition memberships, and conflicts with extraordinary clarity. Otherwise, democratic AI risks meaning that everyone gets a chatbot, while a small group drafts the statute. So why a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.65 for the shareholder hostility quotient? OpenAI receives a moderately positive SHQ because its voluntary transparency, regulatory engagement, safety publications, and public benefit commitments are substantial. But participation remains consultative rather than controlling. Stakeholders are heard through processes OpenAI designs on information OpenAI chooses to disclose under a structure outsiders cannot directly change. The rating is not higher because OpenAI has made credible governance improvements and publishes unusually detailed technical risk materials. It is not lower because disclosure without enforceable participation remains stewardship by invitation. Moving on to Proxyopoly TM rating number 4, Executive Entrenchment Factor, for which Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 2.55 for OpenAI. By definition, executive entrenchment factor measures how insulated senior leadership is from removal, constraint, succession, or performance-based accountability based on ordinary executive job security. The rating considers formal authority, board independence, leadership centrality, succession planning, compensation design, investor dependence, internal power, and whether directors can realistically oppose management. In the analysis, OpenAI's executive entrenchment factor is materially positive, as it is not comparable to a founder-controlled public company in which the CEO owns super-voting shares and chairs the board. Sam Altman does not appear to possess personal majority voting control over OpenAI. He is not the board chairperson. The OpenAI Foundation Board formally controls OpenAI Group and can replace group directors at any time. In principle, The independent board can remove the CEO. In November 2023, the prior board tried to do exactly that. The fact that Altman was removed shows he was not legally invulnerable. The fact that he returned within days shows formal vulnerability, and practical vulnerability are different financial instruments. Altman's reinstatement was driven by an extraordinary convergence of power. Employees threatened mass departure. Microsoft offered to employ Altman and OpenAI personnel. Investors objected. The company's operational continuity was endangered. The board was reconstructed, and Altman later rejoined it after an outside review. The episode suggests that Altman's entrenchment is not primarily based on voting shares. It is based on institutional dependency. He is closely associated with OpenAI's fundraising capacity, recruiting power, commercial narrative, government relationships, product strategy, infrastructure ambitions, and public identity. Replacing him may be legally possible but economically destabilizing. That is de facto entrenchment. OpenAI's subsequent growth may have increased this dependency. The company has raised vast sums, pursued the Stargate infrastructure build-out, expanded relationships with Microsoft, Amazon, SoftBank, Oracle, and other partners, made acquisitions, and positioned itself as both model developer and platform provider. Large commitments create governance momentum. Once a strategy requires hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure, reversing course becomes more difficult. The executive who assembles the strategy becomes harder to replace because counterparties, financing arrangements, employee incentives, and market expectations are organized around the existing plan. This is sometimes called visionary leadership. Sometimes. It is also a succession risk with excellent branding. Altman's board membership creates another concern. OpenAI's safety governance arrangements have improved, and he is not the chair of the Independent Safety and Security Committee. Yet he remains both CEO and a foundation director. The body responsible for controlling the commercial enterprise therefore includes the chief executive of that enterprise. That is not automatically inappropriate. Executive directors can provide essential operating information. But in a structure where outside stockholders cannot elect the controlling board, the presence of the CEO on that board merits heightened scrutiny. Executive compensation is unusually opaque. As a private organization, OpenAI does not publish a public company compensation discussion and analysis, pay ratio disclosure, performance metric table, equity award schedule, or say-on-pay vote. There is no standardized public explanation of how Altman's incentives are tied to safety, infrastructure, efficiency, privacy, regulatory compliance, employee retention, customer outcomes, or the foundation mission. The public, therefore, receives extensive descriptions of OpenAI's safety frameworks without the ordinary proxy disclosure showing whether executive compensation rewards adhere to them. The Safety and Security Committee is a significant mitigating factor. Zico Kolter chairs it, serves exclusively on the foundation board, reducing direct overlap with group commercial governance. The committee includes directors with technical, cybersecurity, and legal backgrounds and receives safety assessments and monitoring reports. The board's expansion after 2023 is another mitigant. The current board is broader and more credentialed than the small board that managed the crisis. Bret Taylor serves as an independent chair. Sue Desmond-Hellman brings public health and nonprofit governance experience. Nicole Seligman brings legal and regulatory experience. Paul Nakasone brings cybersecurity and national security expertise. Adebayo Ogunlesi brings infrastructure and finance experience, but competence does not automatically create independence from institutional reality. Directors must be willing to challenge a CEO whose departure could threaten employee retention, investor confidence, partner relationships, and the company's public valuation. The 2023 board learned what such a challenge costs. Why positive 2.55 for the Proxyopoly TM rating of the executive entrenchment factor for OpenAI. OpenAI's executive entrenchment factor, or EEF, reflects Altman's institutional centrality, the rapid reversal of his 2023 removal, the board reconstruction that followed, limited compensation disclosure, aggressive strategic expansion, and the absence of public shareholder accountability. The rating is moderated because Altman is not chair, does not appear to control the foundation through personal equity, and can formally be removed by an independent board. OpenAI has an abort mechanism. History suggests everyone knows pressing it may abort the company. All right. Now we're getting into Proxyopoly TM rating number 5. It's going to take a minute, so brace yourselves. The regulatory evasion measure. Proxyopoly TM rating number 5, for which Proxyopoly TM has assigned a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 2.10 to the regulatory evasion measure of OpenAI. Regulatory evasion measure, by definition, evaluates the company's propensity to generate regulatory conflict, exploit legal ambiguity, resist oversight, accumulate unresolved compliance exposure, or operate ahead of rules in ways that transfer risks to users, workers, competitors, communities, or public institutions. A positive rating does not mean every disputed practice is unlawful. It means the company's regulatory footprint and strategic behavior create above-average governance risk. In this analysis, OpenAI receives high regulatory evasion measure because it operates at the intersection of unsettled legal regimes while actively scaling products and infrastructure faster than many legislatures, courts, and agencies can establish durable rules. The company faces regulatory exposure across at least 8 major domains: privacy and data protection, consumer protection, child and adolescent safety, copyright and data training, competition and cloud partnerships, frontier model safety, cybersecurity and national security, and finally, infrastructure, energy, and environmental permitting. No single controversy conclusively demonstrates an organization-wide intent to evade regulation. The aggregate pattern nevertheless creates substantial regulatory evasion measure. Regarding privacy and data protection, the Italian data protection proceeding is the clearest historical enforcement example. The authority announced a €15 million sanction and corrective measures concerning ChatGPT. In 2026, however, the authority noted that the measure was temporarily removed after a Rome court accepted OpenAI's opposition. The appropriate governance conclusion is therefore not OpenAI was definitively fined and lost. It is that OpenAI's data practices produced a major cross-border regulatory dispute involving lawful basis, transparency, age-related protections, and information accuracy, followed by successful judicial resistance at an intermediate procedural stage. That sequence is precisely what REM measures, regulatory evasion measure. Legal uncertainty, enforcement exposure, and the capacity to litigate the perimeter of emerging regulation. Regarding consumer and youth safety, the FTC's 2025 chatbot inquiry sought information from OpenAI and other firms regarding AI companions and their effects on children and teenagers. The inquiry covers monetization, product testing, monitoring, disclosures, age restrictions, data handling, negative impacts, and mitigation procedures. The inquiry does not establish a violation. It does establish that consumer-facing AI has become sufficiently consequential for the Federal Trade Commission to use compulsory study authority. OpenAI has expanded youth safety programs, policy blueprints, parental tools, and research. Those measures do reduce REM slightly, but the underlying risk remains structurally high because generative systems can produce persuasive, emotionally responsive, personalized interactions at enormous scale. Product failures can reach millions before a regulator finishes drafting the first requests for information. Next, regarding competition and cloud concentration, the FTC's report on major AI partnerships identified potential concerns involving access to compute and engineering talent, contractual and technical switching costs, cloud commitments, information exchange, exclusivity, and the ability of cloud providers to obtain sensitive technical and commercial information. OpenAI's relationship with Microsoft was a principal subject. OpenAI has since diversified its infrastructure and commercial relationships, including agreements with AWS, SoftBank-linked entities, Oracle, CoreWeave, and others. Diversification can reduce dependency and competition concerns. It can also expand OpenAI's systemic reach. OpenAI is increasingly positioned across models, consumer applications, enterprise development, deployer tools, infrastructure planning, cloud distribution, hardware, and strategic investment. It has announced acquisitions involving deployment services, developer tooling, software applications, model evaluation technology, media, and other capabilities. Each individual transaction may be modest relative to OpenAI's scale. Collectively, they illustrate platform expansion into adjacent layers of the AI economy. The antitrust concern is not merely whether OpenAI becomes a monopoly in one legally defined market, it is whether its capital, user base, model access, infrastructure commitments, cloud partnerships, distribution channels, acquisitions, and developer ecosystem create a feedback loop that competitors cannot replicate. Next, regarding copyright and information rights, OpenAI continues to face unresolved claims concerning training data and generated outputs. These cases involve fundamental questions: whether training constitutes fair use, whether models store or reproduce protected expression, whether outputs can substitute for original works, what licensing obligations apply, and how rights holders can opt out or seek compensation. OpenAI has negotiated licenses with some publishers and contests other claims. The eventual legal framework remains unsettled. From a Proxyopoly TM perspective, that concern is that OpenAI can obtain the benefit of scale while courts take years to determine the rights of content creators. By the time doctrine stabilizes, the commercial ecosystem may already be reorganized around the technology. That is not necessarily evasion in the pejorative sense. It is a regulatory arbitrage through speed. Next, regarding frontier safety and self-regulation, OpenAI's preparedness framework and frontier governance framework are major mitigating factors. They identify serious risks, establish evaluation and safeguard processes, and explain how OpenAI intends to comply with emerging legal standards. The frameworks also reveal a structural issue. Many development decisions remain internally governed. OpenAI's Safety Advisory Group reviews capability and safeguard reports and makes recommendations to leadership. The board's Safety and Security Committee provides oversight, but the public does not receive full access to all evaluations, internal disagreements, red team findings, incident reports, or deployment deliberations. This is understandable. Where disclosures could reveal dangerous capabilities or security weaknesses, it also means the company decides which evidence the public may use to evaluate the company's claim that the company is safe. Independent external assessment exists, but it should be expanded. for technology with potential catastrophic consequences. Internal compliance should not be the final court of appeal. Next, regarding lobbying and public policy influence, OpenAI advocates for AI infrastructure, national safety frameworks, federal leadership, government adoption, education, workforce investment, and approaches to state and federal regulation. Federal lobbying disclosures show direct and external activity involving OpenAI entities. Lobbying is not regulatory evasion. However, regulatory evasion measure rises when the regulated company can materially shape the rules governing its own technology. OpenAI frequently frames policy recommendations in terms of democratic AI, national competitiveness, safety, abundance, and broad access. Those are legitimate policy goals. They can also be used to argue against requirements characterized as fragmented, burdensome, and anti-innovation or strategically disadvantageous. The board should ensure that OpenAI's policy advocacy does not quietly transform responsible regulation into regulation written by the company most affected. Next, regarding energy, environment, and infrastructure. OpenAI's Stargate strategy has moved the organization into utility-scale infrastructure. Its announcements describe planned capacity exceeding 10 gigawatts and substantial investment commitments. A separate partnership includes a 1.2 gigawatt data center lease. OpenAI has emphasized local investment, grid development, domestic manufacturing, jobs, community partnerships, and commitments intended to protect local ratepayers. These are positive elements, if true, but the scale creates unavoidable environmental, social, and governance exposure. Data centers require electricity, water, backup generation, transmission, construction materials, land, semiconductor supply chains, and public permitting. Even where renewable energy is involved, new demand can alter regional grid economics and the availability of clean generation for other users. The phrase AI energy usage understates the issue. OpenAI is particularly in energy system design. The board should disclose energy sources, water intensity emissions, backup generation, transmission impacts, and community agreements, as well as tax incentives and decommissioning obligations at a level commensurate with the physical scale of the projects. Next, regarding national security exposure, OpenAI increasingly engages governments and promotes AI as a component of national competitiveness and democratic resilience. Its models can support cybersecurity, scientific research, government services, defense-adjacent analysis, and intelligence-related applications. Paul Nakasone's board appointment strengthens cybersecurity oversight. It also symbolizes the convergence of commercial AI, national security, surveillance concerns, and geopolitical competition. National security alignment may produce public benefit. It can also reduce transparency because sensitive partnerships and use cases are protected from disclosure. The board must prevent classified or security sensitive from becoming a universal governance blackout. So why a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 2.10 for the regulatory evasion measure of OpenAI? OpenAI's regulatory evasion measure reflects privacy disputes, compulsory FTC studies, unsettled copyright exposure, cloud partnership competition concerns, aggressive platform expansion, lobbying activity, infrastructure externalities, and the reliance on internal governance for frontier model decisions. The score is moderated by OpenAI's substantive safety frameworks, regulatory engagement, published system cards, external testing, PBC mission, and evidence that governmental scrutiny affected its structure. OpenAI does not appear indifferent to regulation. It appears determined to help define regulation before regulation defines OpenAI. Thus brings us to the final Proxyopoly TM score. The Proxyopoly TM score is calculated as the normalized weighted average of the 5 Proxyopoly TM ratings. And to summarize those, again, the proxy accumulation resistance for OpenAI, Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 4.70. Bylaw Fortification Index of OpenAI, Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 4.10. Shareholder Hostility Quotient of OpenAI, Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.65. Executive Entrenchment Factor of OpenAI, Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 2.55. Regulatory Evasion Measure of OpenAI, Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 2.10. This brings us to the final Proxyopoly score calculation.
Ding 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 ring ding 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 ring do not seek the
The final Proxyopoly TM score for OpenAI is positive 3.02. A final Proxyopoly TM score above 3.00 positively indicates an extreme governance outlier in which multiple forms of concentrated power align. OpenAI's result is driven most heavily by proxy accumulation and bylaw fortification index. Investors cannot accumulate ordinary equity and convert it into ultimate governing authority. The foundation's special rights supersede proportional ownership, and the foundation board is not elected through a public shareholder process. Executive entrenchment factor is high but not extreme because Sam Altman does not personally possess the foundation's controlling vote, is not board chair, and can formally be removed. Yet his 2023 removal and rapid reinstatement demonstrate substantial practical entrenchment arising from employee loyalty, investor dependency, commercial relationships, and personal centrality. Shareholder hostility quotient is elevated but moderated by extensive voluntary disclosures, safety frameworks, public benefit initiatives, and engagement with regulators and civil society. REM is higher, or regulatory evasion measure, because OpenAI operates across numerous unsettled regulatory regimes while scaling products, partnerships, acquisitions, policy influence, and industrial infrastructure at exceptional speed. The systemic multiplier is significant. OpenAI is not merely a software vendor whose governance failures would inconvenience one group of shareholders. Its decisions can influence model release norms, safety standards, data center construction, cloud markets, copyright doctrine, education, labor demand, cybersecurity, national policy, and the global competitive balance in advanced AI. A single OpenAI governance decision can become an industry standard before another company's board finishes approving the meeting minutes. The final Proxyopoly TM score of positive 3.02 therefore represents high governance volatility combined with low internal democratic contestability. OpenAI may distribute technological capability broadly while retaining corporate authority narrowly. That is not necessarily fatal to the mission. It is a risk the mission should disclose more clearly. Now moving on to the next section of the podcast, governance policy change recommendations. This will be made for OpenAI to improve its governance score, namely its Proxyopoly TM score, to a more balanced benchmark rating. Governance policy change recommendation number 1. Publish the controlling governance documents. OpenAI should publish the OpenAI Foundation bylaws, relevant portions of the OpenAI Group Charter, the special voting and governance rights held by the Foundation, director appointment and removal procedures, committee charters, conflict of interest rules, related party transaction policies, and any mission enforcement mechanisms that can be disclosed safely. A structural summary is not a substitute for governing text. Investors and the public should not have to infer control arrangements from a corporate blog post. Sensitive commercial terms can be redacted. The constitutional mechanics should not be. Governance policy change recommendation number 2. Establish a defined accountability process for Foundation directors. The Foundation board should not remain indefinitely self-accountable. OpenAI should create staggered director terms, maximum tenure limits, annual performance evaluations, transparent nomination criteria, and a process for receiving nominations or recommendations from independent stakeholder bodies. Foundation directors should publish annual statements describing their oversight priorities, attendance, committee responsibilities, conflicts, and material areas of dissent. A mission board that cannot be removed by investors needs another credible removal mechanism. Governance policy change recommendation number 3. Create a stakeholder representation without surrendering safety control. OpenAI should establish formal advisory councils representing employees, users, affected communities, researchers, civil society, content creators, education, labor, public health, and infrastructure hosts. These bodies need not possess authority to release models or access sensitive technical information. They should possess defined consultation rights, the ability to submit agenda items to the Foundation board, and the right to receive written responses. Listening sessions are useful. Governance requires a paper trail. Governance policy change recommendation number 4. Adopt an eventual public company voting framework before the IPO. Before any initial public offering, OpenAI should disclose whether public stockholders will receive annual director votes, proxy access, shareholder proposal rights, special meeting rights, written consent, voting rights over major acquisitions, advisory votes on executive compensation, votes on auditor ratification, and approval rights over material changes to Foundation control structure. OpenAI should not have to wait until an S1 filing to inform prospective investors that the ticker comes without the steering wheel. You ever just drive a car and hate when the steering wheel just flies off? Me too. Governance policy change recommendation number 5. Add a sunset or periodic ratification requirement for special Foundation rights. Permanent mission control may be protected, and it may protect OpenAI from short-term investors. Permanent, unreviewable control may also create long-term stagnation. The special governance rights should be subjected to periodic independent review, perhaps every 5 years. A review panel including legal, safety, public interest, employee, and investor representatives should assess whether the rights remain necessary and whether additional accountability safeguards are required. The Foundation could retain ultimate control while being required to explain publicly why that control remains justified. Governance policy change recommendation number 6, strengthen board independence from management and commercial partners. The foundation should maintain a substantial majority of directors with no executive role at OpenAI, no material investment in OpenAI Group, no current employment by a major OpenAI cloud provider or investor, and no material business relationship with OpenAI. OpenAI should disclose a stricter independence matrix covering equity holdings, investor relationships, cloud partnerships, portfolio company relationships, government contracts, consulting work, family relationships, charitable relationships, and service on boards of competing or complementary AI companies. Technical independence standards are inadequate for an ecosystem built on interlocking capital, compute, and distribution. Governance policy change recommendation number 7. Separate executive participation from safety adjudication. Sam Altman should receive safety information and have an opportunity to respond, but final determinations concerning whether a model meets deployment thresholds should be made by a genuinely independent board committee. The Safety and Security Committee should have the authority to delay deployment, commission external tests, require remediation, and report unresolved disagreements to the full Foundation board. Material dissent should be disclosed after security-sensitive details are removed. A recommendation that management may ignore is not oversight, it is advice. Governance policy change recommendation number 8. Commission independent audits of the preparedness framework. OpenAI should appoint independent assessors to evaluate whether the preparedness framework is being applied as written. Audits should test evaluation quality, safeguard effectiveness, escalation procedures, deployment exceptions, incident reporting, and post-release monitoring. The public report should disclose methodology limitations, management responses, and unresolved findings. OpenAI audits financial controls for investors. Frontier risk controls deserve at least comparable seriousness. Governance policy change recommendation number 9. Publish an annual regulatory litigation report. The report should summarize material regulatory inquiries, enforcement proceedings, privacy disputes, consumer protection matters, copyright litigation, competition reviews, safety incidents, government information requests, major settlements, appeals, and corrective measures. OpenAI should distinguish allegations, preliminary findings, final decisions, and overturned or stayed measures. The Italian privacy matter demonstrates why procedural precision is essential. Governance policy change recommendation number 10. Adopt a comprehensive creator and training data governance policy. OpenAI should disclose categories of training data, licensing practices, opt-out mechanisms, provenance controls, output safeguards, rights holder complaint procedures, and policies for preventing memorized reproduction. An independent content and data governance council should review these practices. Fair use may eventually prevail in some cases. It is not a complete stakeholder relations strategy. Governance policy change recommendation number 11. Publish a compute, energy, water, and emissions report. The report should cover OpenAI controlled and dedicated partner infrastructure, including contracted and operational gigawatts, energy sources, hourly carbon matching, water withdrawal and consumption, backup generation, local transmission upgrades, public incentives, community commitments, ratepayer protections, construction labor, supply chain emissions, and decommissioning plans. OpenAI should report facility-level data where security and contractual restrictions permit. A company building 10 plus gigawatts of infrastructure has graduated from sustainability slogans to utility accountability. Governance policy change recommendation number 12. Link executive incentives to safety and mission outcomes. OpenAI should disclose executive compensation principles and establish measurable performance factors related to model safety, cybersecurity, privacy, regulatory compliance, employee retention, whistleblower protection, energy efficiency, community impact, responsible deployment, and foundation mission outcomes. Clawback and malice provisions should apply where misconduct, material safety failures, misleading disclosures, or regulatory violations occur. Revenue growth should not be the only metric with electricity. Governance policy change recommendations number 13. Strengthen whistleblower protections. Employees and contractors should have access to independent reporting channels overseen by the Foundation Board. Policies should prohibit retaliation for raising concerns involving safety, security, privacy, discrimination, copyright, financial controls, public claims, infrastructure, and regulatory compliance. OpenAI should publish aggregate information about reports, substantiation rates, remediation, and retaliation allegations. The organization cannot rely on employee courage as a substitute for an institutional process. Governance policy change recommendation number 14. Disclose lobbying and policy influence comprehensively. OpenAI should publish direct federal and state lobbying expenditures, payments to outside firms, trade association memberships, policy coalitions, political contributions where applicable, government advisory roles, principal legislative priorities, and board oversight of advocacy. The board should explain how each major policy position advances both the mission and the public interest. A company advocating democratic AI should make its own influence democratically legible. Governance policy change recommendation number 15. Establish acquisition and related party review standards. OpenAI's acquisitions and strategic investments should be reviewed by independent committees where directors, executives, investors, or commercial partners have potential conflicts. Material acquisitions should be accompanied by disclosures explaining strategic rationale, value, process, related party relationships, integrated risk, safety implications, workforce effects, data implications, and consistency with the public benefit. The company's acquisition program is expanding, so should the governance around it. Governance policy change recommendation number 16. Adopt a clear succession and emergency governance plan. The board should maintain and test plans for temporary CEO incapacity, permanent CEO succession, sudden executive departure, mass employee resignation threats, partner withdrawal, major model incidents, cyber compromise, infrastructure interruption, and board deadlock. The 2023 crisis showed that governance can fail through speed even when everyone believes they are protecting the mission. A succession plan should exist before it simply becomes a group chat. Next, we have the Board of Directors 2026 AGM voting recommendations for OpenAI. In the scope and voting convention of this private company set to announce its initial public offering later in the year or early 2027, it's important to note that OpenAI does not concurrently conduct a conventional public company AGM at which outside stockholders elect the OpenAI Foundation Board. The OpenAI Foundation Board special governance rights allow it to appoint and replace the OpenAI Group Board. The following recommendations therefore apply the Proxyopoly TM proxy voting policy and guidelines as though each named director were presented for an annual re-election by a fully informed stakeholder election post-initial public offering. They are governance judgments and protest signals, not representations that a public ballot presently exists, however one likely will in the future. Where against withhold is used, it indicates that material accountability concerns requiring structural reform. Abstain indicates that available record supports neither full endorsement nor categorical opposition. 4 votes indicate that the director's expertise and apparent oversight contribution justify support, subject to continuing accountability. First director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Sam Altman, CEO and director. Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation: vote against. Sam Altman is not board chair and does not appear to possess personal voting control over the OpenAI Foundation. However, the 2023 removal and reinstatement episode demonstrated extraordinary de facto entrenchment. Employee, investor, and partner dependency made the board's formal authority difficult to sustain, and Altman later returned to the board after the outside review expressed confidence in his leadership. His central role in fundraising, infrastructure acquisitions, and policy advocacy, as well as product strategy, further increases key person and succession risk. Proxyopoly TM recommends against the election of Sam Altman until OpenAI publishes a credible succession plan, executive compensation framework, conflict disclosures, and governance arrangements demonstrating that the board can supervise the CEO without threatening institutional collapse. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Bret Taylor, Chairperson. Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation: vote against. Bret Taylor helped stabilize OpenAI after the 2023 crisis, oversaw board expansion, supported the outside review, and chaired the recapitalization process. There are material governance contributions, however. As chair, he is also the principal board-level steward of a structure in which a nonprofit with 23% economic ownership retains exclusive control over a commercial enterprise financed substantially by parties that cannot elect the controlling board. Proxyopoly TM recommends against to register concern over the lack of published governing documents, director accountability mechanisms, and public election rights, as well as full transparency concerning the recapitalization's mission safeguards. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Adam D'Angelo, director. Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation: vote against. Adam D'Angelo remained on the reconstructed board after the 2023 governance crisis and now serves on the Safety and Security Committee. His experience as a technology founder and executive is relevant, but his continued presence links the current board directly to the earlier breakdown in CEO board communication and the failed removal process. The public record does not provide a detailed director-specific account of his role in those events or the lessons he drew from them. Proxyopoly TM recommends against, pending further disclosure of board decision-making, committee performance, independence considerations, and the specific governance reforms for which he has accepted responsibility. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Dr. Sue Desmond-Hellman. Director, Proxyopoly TM recommendation: vote for. Dr. Sue Desmond-Hellman brings experience in public health, scientific organizations, philanthropy, and nonprofit leadership, areas directly relevant to OpenAI's mission and societal risk. Her appointment expanded the board beyond a narrow technology investor profile after the 2023 crisis. Proxyopoly TM recommends for, with the expectation that she press for measurable public health impact assessments, independent model risk review, stronger stakeholder participation, and transparent foundation accountability. Support is warranted because OpenAI requires directors capable of evaluating benefits and harms beyond product adoption and valuation. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Dr. Zico Kolter, Director and Safety and Security Committee Chair. Proxyopoly TM recommendation, vote for. Dr. Zico Kolter provides specialized expertise in machine learning robustness, adversarial testing, AI safety, and technical evaluation. He chairs the Safety and Security Committee, serves exclusively on the Foundation Board, and participates in OpenAI group governance as a non-voting observer, creating greater separation from the commercial board than most other Foundation directors. Proxyopoly TM recommends 4 because independent technical safety oversight is indispensable to OpenAI's mission. Continued support should depend on the committee receiving genuine deployment authority, access to external assessors, resources independent of management, and a mechanism for disclosing unresolved safety disagreements. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is retired U.S. Army General Paul M. Nakasone. Director, Proxyopoly TM board voting recommendation, vote abstain. Paul Nakasone's leadership of U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency provides exceptional cybersecurity, intelligence, and national security expertise. Those capabilities are relevant as OpenAI confronts model theft, cyber misuse, critical infrastructure exposure, geopolitical competition, and government deployment. At the same time, his background heightens legitimate questions concerning surveillance, civil liberties, military use, government access, and the boundary between public safety and security state influence. Proxyopoly TM recommends abstain pending stronger disclosure of OpenAI's government use policies, civil liberties, safeguards, and national security contracting oversight, and rules governing access to user and model data. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Adebayo Ogunlesi. Director, Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, vote abstain. Adebayo Ogunlesi, brings extensive experience in infrastructure investment, global finance, and complex commercial deployment, which is highly relevant to OpenAI's Stargate expansion and multi-gigawatt data center strategy. His expertise can improve capital discipline and execution oversight. However, OpenAI's rapidly expanding infrastructure relationships create potential conflicts among financing, project development, energy procurement, investor returns, community impact, and mission objectives. Proxyopoly TM recommends abstain until OpenAI publishes a detailed independence analysis, related party transaction controls, infrastructure sustainability metrics, and Ogunlesi's specific committee responsibilities. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Nicole Seligman. Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, vote for. Nicole Seligman contributes substantial legal, regulatory, corporate governance, and global enterprise experience and serves on the Safety and Security Committee. OpenAI needs directors capable of distinguishing preliminary allegations from final findings, supervising litigation, evaluating privacy and competition exposure, and preventing mission language from substituting for legal controls. Proxyopoly TM recommends 4, while expecting Seligman to champion an annual regulatory report, stronger whistleblower protections, comprehensive lobbying disclosure, and publication of the Foundation's core governance documents. Her expertise directly addresses several drivers of OpenAI's elevated regulatory evasion measure and Bylaw Fortification Index. And just to recap for the Proxyopolist at home, the recommendations for the elections to the board of OpenAI prior to its AGM, prior to its initial public offering, is as follows. Directors of the board on the docket for re-election are CEO Sam Altman. Proxyopoly TM recommendation, vote against. Chairperson Bret Taylor. Proxyopoly TM recommendation, vote against. Director Adam D'Angelo. Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, vote against. Director Dr. Sue Desmond-Hellman, Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, vote for. Dr. Zico Kolter, Director, Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, vote for. Paul M. Nakasone, Director, Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, abstain. Adebayo Ogunlesi, Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, abstain for the Director. And Nicole Seligman, Director, Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, vote for. In conclusion, OpenAI's governance structure is neither a conventional nonprofit nor a conventional public benefit corporation. It is a nonprofit-controlled commercial platform in which the foundation, OpenAI Foundation, holds a large but non-majority economic interest while retaining decisive governance authority through special rights of OpenAI Group Special Benefit Company. That structure can be defended as mission protection. It can also insulate the controlling board from investors, employees, users, communities, and institutions affected by OpenAI's decisions. The final Proxyopoly TM score for OpenAI of positive 3.02 reflects this tension in governance. OpenAI's proxy accumulation resistance of positive 4.70 is an extreme because outside investors cannot convert accumulated equity into ultimate control. Its Bylaw Fortification Index of positive 4.10 reflects a legally fortified separation between ownership and ultimate control. Its Bylaw Fortification of positive 4.10 reflects a legally fortified separation between ownership and governance. Its shareholder hostility quotient of positive 1.65 acknowledges meaningful transparency and safety initiatives while recognizing that stakeholder participation remains consultative. Its executive entrenchment factor of positive 2.55 reflects Sam Altman's de facto institutional entrenchment despite formal board authority. Its regulatory evasion measure of positive 2.10 captures the convergence of privacy, competition, youth safety, copyright, frontier risk, infrastructure, lobbying, and national security exposure. OpenAI supporters can reasonably argue that ordinary shareholder governance is poorly suited to a company whose mission involves potentially civilization-shaping technology. A hedge fund should not be able to acquire 9.8% of OpenAI and demand that model safeguards be removed before the next quarter. That concern is valid. It does not follow that the only alternative is concentrated authority inside a nonprofit board with limited public accountability. Mission governance must be more accountable than shareholder governance, not merely different from it. OpenAI's current structure contains promising safeguards, an independent chair, a broadened board, a dedicated safety and security committee, a public benefit corporation, a mission-focused foundation, safety frameworks, system cards, regulatory engagement, and large public benefit commitments. But the structure relies heavily on the judgment, independence, competence, and continued cohesion of a small number of directors. The public is asked to trust that they will balance safety, growth, national competition, infrastructure, investor expectations, user demand, and the interests of humanity. That is an unusually ambitious job description for 8 people on the board who are not elected by humanity. The central governance question is therefore not whether OpenAI's mission is admirable, it is whether the mechanisms designed to protect that mission are therefore protected from capture, complacency, executive dependency, commercial pressure, and institutional groupthink. The 2023 board crisis showed that formal governance authority can disintegrate when it lacks operational legitimacy. The 2025 recapitalization made the foundation vastly wealthier and preserved its control. The 2026 infrastructure expansion increased OpenAI's physical and political footprint. A future IPO could give millions of investors financial exposure without providing them meaningful control. OpenAI may eventually become one of the most valuable public companies in history. The board should determine before then whether the public will become shareholders, stakeholders, or merely passengers. The Proxyopoly TM conclusion is direct. OpenAI has built a governance structure capable of resisting ordinary shareholder pressure. It has not yet demonstrated an equally powerful mechanism for holding the resistors accountable. And that's all the time we have for this episode, Proxyopolists at home. Thanks for listening. As always, we leave you with the final disclaimer. The professional opinions expressed in this podcast are property of Proxyopoly TM. The Proxyopoly TM score and accompanying analysis are purely communicative for educational entertainment purposes only. This Proxyopoly TM research report in its verbalized or written form is solely for informational objectives, does not constitute investment advice, and shall not be misconstrued as a suggestion or an offer to buy or sell any securities. No generalist or sensationalist statements are intended or being made. Any resemblance to real-world events may be deliberate, though with OpenAI's current trajectory, reality may be catching up faster than anticipated, while past performance is not indicative of future returns. And as always, if it ain't Proxyopoly, you're Proxyopolying.